Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing today? My name is Renee, and I'm your host today for Signals in the Noise, daily insights into trends across the narrative landscape. I'm definitely holding it down alone today, but my co-hosts EVA and Miguel will be back joining us tomorrow. I'm super excited about today's episode. We have a special guest joining us, and we'll introduce her very soon. Before we get into the show, let's get grounded into what this is, who we are, and what we do. So we know that conversations unfold around us, reinforcing ideas, beliefs, and values. We also know that narrative is not static. Stories and messages can both trickle up and trickle down, from local to national, from politicians to celebrities, and from influencers and micro-influencers who spread information in both centralized and decentralized ways. Our team combs through news articles, social media content, websites, and we dissect content to identify conversations, messages, and stories. This allows us to identify the shape and color of how meaning is made in the landscape in which we're all organizing and communicating. This is what we call monitoring the narrative weather. Just think of us as your team of resident meteorologists tracking the narrative weather across the country. Today's format will look a lot like yesterday's, but we have a very special guest joining us. I'm super excited. So we're going to jump right into a new segment, and it's called Voices from the Field. Let's get into it. So today we have a very, very special guest. I want to bring in Shira Chair, a key member of our research team here at This Is Signals. Welcome, Shira. She's the incredible lead writer behind all of our episodes. She synthesizes the research, helps us make sense of it, and is one of our super experts on disinformation and misinformation. Welcome to this side of the broadcast, Shira. How does it feel? Let us know.
Super expert is definitely like... I don't know about all that.
Embrace it.
Yes, right. I should be taking positive feedback. I'm really excited to be here. I'm also terrified, but let's just roll right into it.
We're going to have a convo, just me and you. Yeah. Okay, so let's get right into it. Just to peel back the curtain a bit, can you tell us a little bit about your role in the Narrative Weather Station, what we do here at This Is Signals, and why it matters?
Sure. So the Narrative Weather Station is grounded in strategic communications work by power building organizations that are led primarily by people of color. Shout outs to Reframe for their critical work of supporting leaders in these organizations over the years. We know that many of us operate in echo chambers, and the Narrative Weather Station is an attempt to understand more of what's happening in the conversations around us.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about how we do that. Let the people know.
Yes. So we use a combination of small listening and big listening. By small listening, we mean listening to folks on the ground who we have relationships with, traditional media scanning, and social media scanning to inform what keywords we plug into our big listening tool. Big listening, then, is the art and practice of what tracking the internet is talking about at any given moment and making sense of the millions of pieces of data in the online spaces that impact the meaning people make IRL. Just to be clear, this isn't just the big social media platforms, but content moving, which ranges from national to regional and local newspapers, academic journals, to the dark corners of 4chan.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Lord, when you say 4chan, I get triggered. We see a lot of wild content. We don't see a lot of kissing babies and not a lot of heart eyes either. Some of it's quite disturbing. Folks often make the mistake of thinking that big data tells us the full picture, but it's really just a small fraction of the equation. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So we talk about the human intelligence component, and that's really where our political and narrative analysis comes in. We make sure to ingest, digest, and dissect social, cultural, and political conversations so that our narrative analysis is accessible and easy to understand, and that our recommendations are as clear as possible. So for the Elections 2020 edition of Signals in the Noise, for example, we're collaborating with our partners at Reframe and the Movement for Black Lives to bring daily national briefings where we have the challenge of synthesizing daily threats and opportunities in the narrative landscape for leaders to jump on, tracking mis and disinformation as it moves, and watching content and stories more broadly that are trending, including the audiences and influencers that are moving messages as trends tend to ebb and flow.
Mm-hmm. So you've been sifting through a lot of information and helping make sense of it all. So tell us what's at the top of your mind for today, Shai.
Sure. So some of the top stories on the election, as of yesterday anyway, are speculating that the Trump administration is attempting a coup. Ugh.
Mm.
This is, of course, in response to what we expected.
Mhm.
Republicans continue to escalate their efforts to overturn Biden's election victory by refusing to acknowledge Donald Trump's defeat. Because, they've been locked up with him over the last 4 years, and that was not about to change overnight.
Child, this is why we call them ride or dies, but they take it a little too literally for me. It's
Way
just a
too
bit
literal.
too much. Just too much.
Right. The GOP's ongoing assaults on democracy are bending the idea of law and order to suit their agenda. They've never stopped their efforts to expand the role of the president and what he has allowed to get away with, especially on things that would have otherwise been deemed illegal if, someone like Obama was still president.
Mm.
This is part of the narrative belief that the government has the right to enforce the rule of law however it sees fit to protect the state, even if that means infringing on individual rights and privileges.
Yeah. We see this as leaders in the GOP say that the president is well within his rights to investigate claims of voter fraud.
Right. And if you pay attention, this is the narrative embedded underneath nearly every Trump puppet statement since the polls closed last week. Disinformation about the election does continue, and we see that with the hashtag Dominion voting systems, hashtag Biden was not elected, and hashtag Maidengate, which are being used by chaos agents and those who refuse to acknowledge the president's loss.
Okay, so if for lack of a better term, they're big mad. Big mad. The president definitely told us that he doesn't like to lose. So this should not come as a surprise to anyone. People are saying that he was exhibiting very big loser energy at the first press conference on election night. His shoulders were all hunched, voice was all timid. It was a different Trump than we've seen in a very long time, and maybe even ever. I don't know that I've ever seen that side of him.
Yeah, you're right. He definitely didn't seem like himself, and that's putting it nicely. But let's continue before we get off that. Disinformation on the election is not new either. I mean, you know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. We've tracked different versions of their hashtags and how conversations have moved on multiple platforms with hashtags Stop the Steal on election day or hashtags mail fraud and count every legal vote between Wednesday and Saturday. These hashtags and conversations inside of them include racist dog whistles and the false claim that undocumented folks are voting in droves, that deep state Democrats have stolen the elections, and other baseless conspiracy theories. What we know as disinformation now is what we recognize as propaganda before the meme wars became the culture wars in the age of the internet. And we already know the culture wars have been around for a long time. We track this information because it can often give us an early sign of how stories will spin and gives us an edge in our strategy.
Yep. Okay, so we know that disinformation is as old as Jesus himself. We know that. So tell us, Shai, when it comes to disinformation, what are some of the things that you're thinking about? What are you thinking about?
Okay, so I'm thinking about how fights against the outcome of election are not just fights against democracy, but they're against the organizers who delivered wins across the country, both in rural and urban communities. And this is part of a larger narrative where xenophobia, racism, and other isms manifest through either questions of the credibility or, let's be real, criminality of young people and questioning Black, Indigenous, and Latinx leadership, and the key role they played in this election season in states like Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, to name a few.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely true. So part of the expertise that you bring to our team is tracking stories that rely on misinformation and disinformation. Given that there's so much of it, for example, around the election or COVID, we've seen a lot of this. How do you identify which pieces to focus on? And what are some of the recent examples that you'd like to share with our audience today?
So that's always a challenge. Usually when you find one conspiracy theory, you find a bunch of others, and then you find yourself stuck on 4chan for way too long. It's definitely a rabbit hole. And the team, we find ourselves having to come up for air pretty often and just kind of grounding ourselves and asking questions about not just what the dominant narratives are, but what are the openings and opportunities so that we can seed messages and narratives that advocate for progress, justice, and liberation. Because if not, we get sucked into doom scrolling, which can be demoralizing and fuel our insomnia.
Girl, you know that I've had nightmares about both Lindsey Graham and anti-mask rallies. And this is thanks to the work in South Carolina and Florida. I can't sleep sometimes. It's really sad.
Same on the Lindsey Graham nightmares. Also,
not a good nightmare to have.
No, I also dreamt I was like an actual hanging Chad once, like with a hole through me and everything. That was great.
Oh, Florida.
Florida. On the disinfo tip, though, when Pfizer announced their high efficacy vaccine this weekend, it's resurrected, already debunked conspiracy theories about Bill Gates, about how
Mhm.
COVID is a biological weapon, lies that date back to the beginning of the pandemic. And while these things may seem on the edge of nonsense, people carry with them the pre-existing beliefs shaped by many things around them that make them common sense.
Mm.
So, for example, these conspiracy theories about the vaccine reinforces beliefs in many Black and communities of color that the government and companies, will use us as guinea pigs. This, of course, is going to provide some immense challenges ahead.
Child, all I'll say is that I read about Henrietta Lacks and I know about the Tuskegee experiment. But can you tell us a little bit more about the COVID disinfo? I'm interested in that.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the Tuskegee experiment because there are like wild accusations on Facebook that the
Mhm.
vaccine trials are part two, basically. We saw them
Mhm.
back in April. Here they are again. It's like we never learn the lessons.
Mhm.
Um, while COVID disinfo ramps up on Facebook, it's not as high in volume in comparison to falsehoods on voter and election fraud, which represented 17 of the top 20 posts on Facebook between November 3rd and November 8th. Platforms like Facebook and YouTube continue to fall short on the mark, despite many platform accountability activists and disinformation scholars trying to push them to do better.
Mhm. We know that algorithms rely on reactions and those reactions make a profit. We know that.
Yeah, and the stuff that trends on these platforms are not always the dominant narratives we see in media outlets or what we hear on the streets, the phones, the doors, or WhatsApp groups, but they are definitely competing for narrative domination. This is why tracking narratives across different audiences and platforms, including in person, is really important. What is
Mhm.
dominating for one community may not be dominant for another. For example, anti-lockdown groups on Facebook, their dominant narratives are rooted in ideas of personal responsibility and individual freedoms. So anti-big government sentiment and anti-government conspiracy theories run pretty much unchecked here.
Yeah. I've been hearing also a lot of chatter about Democratic moderates, Representative Abigail Spanberger from Virginia and House Majority Whip James Clyburn out of South Carolina, and they've been critiquing the left. So, can you tell us more about that story and what it means for the narrative landscape that we're organizing in?
Yeah, so I've been hearing the same chatter, blaming the left for down ballot defeats in the media since Friday. And
Hmm.
Representatives Spanberger and Clyburn are two major folks in the conversation, as they've been claiming progressive policies like the Green New Deal, Medicaid for All, and calls to defund the police led to big down ballot losses. Now, we watched these narratives over the summer as people poured into the streets in defense of Black lives.
Yeah.
The arguments claiming demands to defund the police were too radical and painted the picture of activists, organizers, and everyday people as rioters and mobs is classic.
Hmm.
The argument has solidified as a core belief for some audiences, including moderate and centrist Democrats, but also others who don't even identify with a political party, including some people who simultaneously hold the belief that the relationship between police and Black and communities of color must change. In painting progressives as impractical or politically correct, the right's embedded ideas and beliefs about socialism, the radical left, and populism frequent the narrative battleground in which social movements contend, not just for political power, but also for narrative power.
It's clear to me that the stories that we're missing are our stories, the stories of the activists and the grassroots organization that have secured wins for the Democrats. Jen Soriano talked about this yesterday on yesterday's broadcast, and she really said that we need to lean into stories of people power and stories about the power of organizing. And I totally agree.
I agree too. I want to see more stories about how the Navajo Nation canvassed in Arizona, or more stories on Souls to the Polls across Florida. Like, I really
Mhm.
want to see more of that.
Yeah.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was interviewed in the New York Times, and that was a popular source of conversation this weekend, as we see in discussions across Twitter and 8 different subreddits. The belief is echoed everywhere, including in that interview with AOC. Democrats don't know how to explain their platforms to the average voter or engage with a growing base of millennials and now Gen Zers who see the world differently than they do.
Rewind, please. Run that back. Say that part again, please. The people need to hear it. Okay, so you're not going to run it back, Shy? That's fine. Okay, we won't say it again. I think it's true. Like, Democrats don't know how to explain their platforms to the average voter or engage with the growing base of millennials or Gen Zers. And it's because they see the world differently than they do. So that part. So tell us what else is moving inside of the conversation.
Yeah, sure. So we also saw stories track about Stacey Abrams in Georgia, as well as, but by and large, we need to contend for more airspace to claim the victory for what it is. And can we also say the fact that like all progressive Democrats who ran on progressive policies won their races? Like clearly progressivism is not the problem here.
Facts. Yes, agreed, agreed. Okay, so what do you think are the narrative priorities for those of us who are fighting for progressive policies in this period of transitioning administration due to Biden's electoral victory?
Yeah. So, in terms of our policies, we have to avoid the trap of using this moment to only criticize, really, the incoming administration and instead focus our energy on ensuring they support progressive appointments in key roles and progressive legislation like the Breathe Act or the Green New Deal. This includes making these policies feel alive, desired, and make them common sense solutions for masses of everyday people in this country. We need to take advantage and build power any way we can. And there's a real opportunity to do that here. Now, I'm not saying we abandon our talking points, but know your audience because those talking points might not be understood by folks outside of our echo chambers.
Right.
Also, I want everyone to know that the anarchist in me is screaming. And if any of my comments do this, they're going to have a lot of questions for me.
Okay, so I hear you. Progressives and leftists don't co-opt moderate messages in order to push progressive ideology enough. For sure.
Right. And I hate to say it, but it's true. It's moderate messages that help win over persuadable audiences. And no, not everyone is talking to persuadables, but we do owe it to ourselves to be rigorous with our messaging. Like take the Biden campaign, for example. The slogan Build Back Better is popular, not because of the progressive ideas that helped Biden build his agenda, but because the slogan is based on values that support all human beings. Instead of giving the right the strategic upper hand and red baiting and fear mongering, we need to get ahead. We need to take advantage of the momentum in this moment. We need to be able to uplift our beliefs and ensure our messages are also lifted and accepted by wider audiences because that's how we win.
I like the word win because I'm very tired of taking L's. It's just too much. I really want us to do better. I want to see us win. No more L's, okay? 2020 has been a lot of L's. Let's do better. So it's time for us to wind down today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shai. I hope it wasn't too painful. How do you feel?
I feel better now that it's over. But well, thank you for having me. This is like really good.
I hope that you'll join us again soon. It's so great to see the person, the mastermind behind the scripts and the briefings that we've been hosting every day. So my co-host Miguel and EVA will be back joining us tomorrow in the regular format, where we will continue to track these stories and more as we inch closer towards January 20th, 2021. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye.